this to this. So getting started, I took this really old terrarium that I had put together. It was disgusting, gross. Plants were doing a great job, but it looks like the rest of it wasn't holding up too well. So it was time for a revamp. So taking a look at this, you can see, the inside was gross and disgusting, yes, but I also had a seized up old pump here that was pretty gross. Of course, all the algae there, and there were even dead bugs sitting in here. Amongst all the algae squeezed between all of the foam, and yeah, it was just gross, and it was definitely a time for a revamp. So up first, I had to get started with the scape. So quickly peeling this off, so then I could get to the soil and, more importantly, the plants. I wanted to repurpose just about everything that I could inside of this to make sure that I wasn't being wasteful of any of this old disgusting stuff from the old terrarium, of course. So took quite a bit of time getting through all the plants, getting them untangled, of course spraying them down because I wanted to keep them alive here on life support for the few hours I thought it would take to remake a terrarium. So in here, of course, pulling it apart piece by piece, got the plants out for the most part. Now getting the rest of the scape out, all of these old pots, transferring them into a nice cheap plastic bag so that I could keep them alive. Next up, ripping out all the scape, getting rid of this old pump which had not been taken out or cleaned in a while. And believe it or not, I even found a cricket. I hadn't put crickets in here in months. So that blew my mind. Up next, getting the soil out of here, and then the drainage layer, because I wanted to reuse all of them. So here I am with a clean, somewhat, terrarium. After a little bit of scrubbing and cleaning, I could say that's what I had. So I basically got to work, and it took much longer than I thought. I had to keep the plants over here alive on life support, which ended up being quite a few days. So taking a look at the terrarium, I wanted to make the vision of what I wanted. Once I had something good enough in mind, a good place to start with, I got going with the actual scape. In this, I chose foam. Foam is in my opinion, the easiest way to build somewhat of a hardscape or the back of your terrarium. And believe it or not, it gives you a decent bit of flexibility. And I don't really hate the look of it all that much. So I think that it can look good in the right setting. So after getting this done, I basically took some of the old pots that I had from the previous terrarium. I took old pots that I even found sitting outside and sprayed them down to make them look somewhat cohesive with the spray foam that I had put inside the tank, and I was sitting there waiting as it was curing for a very long time. Sprayed some more in there because I had an idea about a few things to add on. So then right after that, it was finally settled. I took a look at maybe adding a few more things in here, what it would look like, and tried to get a good vision of what I wanted to see here. The vision is definitely the most important piece of this. If you don't have a vision of what you're going to make, then you're basically just going to throw a bunch of things together and it's going to look like a big jumbled up mess. After all these pots dried off, I then brought them over to the terrarium and the foam, which was now solidified, played around until I found a look that I was okay with and somewhat liked. So here we go, the final setup. Once I really liked that, I turned the terrarium over and put spray foam on. I wanted to make sure that that's really what I wanted to see there. So I just put on a little bit for this first go, just enough to hold the pots in place while I could stand it up and really paint that picture of what it would look like in the future in my head. So after putting in those starter tacks, I stood it up, made sure I liked what I was seeing. Soon after, I filled in all the gaps and tried basically just cleaning up the look so I could cover up the most that I could. touching up on a few of the pieces here. I was pretty happy with that. While it was drying, I had to make sure that the plant stayed alive because this was now quite a few days later, and I was starting to get pretty scared that the plants weren't going to make it. Soon after the foam was hardened, I then took a blade where I could shave off a few pieces here and there, and believe it or not, just taking off a few of the peaks that are a little bit too high goes a really long way in making this look a little bit more natural than it otherwise would. So I got carving away. This was a portion of a cave that I envisioned in here for maybe some animals down the line. Up next, I wanted to get some sprays that I had in order to make this look less shiny and foamy and more like a natural setup. So here, I took the can, sprayed, and tried again, and sprayed, and yep, that's when I found out that I needed to go to Home Depot and get a new can. So that's exactly what I did. And got to the aisle, picked the first thing I could find, and got, of course, my peat moss, a mixture of soil that I wanted to throw on the back here. Sprayed this down real good. It was pretty toxic and pretty smelly, so I definitely made sure to air it out for a little bit after this, but patted in all the areas that I wanted covered as best I could, sprayed, and I basically just threw handfuls on there, and just figured some would stick on the back, and hopefully enough would just stick on the back. So after a little bit, I turned it back upright, got some of the dirt out of the pots to make sure the drainage was still there. And, I figured, hey, maybe some water in here will make it look better. So then I tried spraying it down a little bit, trying to see what it would actually look like once, there were plants and animals inside of here. And after that, I was pretty much happy, thinking it would look much better with plants. So I moved on to the drainage layer, which had been sitting outside for a decent bit of time, so water collected, but this was still all great, had good nutrients. I wanted to maintain those. So I started throwing them in, and it's really cool. In this, you can see some of the springtails that were down in there for many days, and of course they're eating all the bacteria and filtering everything out. What was that? Could have sworn that I saw something there. Okay, maybe not. Oh, there it is. Oh, wow. All right, that's a pretty decent sized worm in there. That must have came from the old setup, and it's been quite a few months. I think I put that in there months ago. I didn't assume that it made it, but all right. That somehow made it into the drainage layer, which was not the intention, but pretty cool to find that it made it there. So up next, I of course brought the screen over from the previous setup because it already had the correct shape, patted that down, and this is to keep, of course, the soil separate from the drainage layer. I didn't want soil creeping into the bottom where excess mold would be built up. I wanted to make sure the soil could stay where the plants were. So I took the previous soil, mixed it up a bit with the new peat moss mixture, and honestly, I just sat there admiring all the pieces that were inside of this, all the decaying and dead insects and plants that were in there. And it smelled really good. So took the first occupant or large occupant and introduced him to the setup, which it looks like he, basically got right to it and started making the place somewhat of a home already before it was even decorated. So pretty cool to see. So after this, I experimented with what it would look like throwing in the next big inhabitant to the terrarium. So next up, finally, this had been over a week. The plants were sitting here on life support, so I was finally able to free them as they started decaying, and they actually turned out taking it pretty well. So I was definitely happy with that. I just needed to make sure I could trim up some of the unsightly leaves and portions of these plants because, of course, I wanted to make the new terrarium look as good as possible. Up first, of course, I pulled it out. I took a look at the gorgeous roots because they were absolutely beautiful to see. Next, brought that over to the terrarium where this plant would now call home, just like the big tiki man and the worm. And turn it around so that the unsightly portions kind of move back. Now next, took another plant and kind of experimented with where I put it because I don't know, I couldn't see this plant going anywhere. It didn't fit anywhere but down at the bottom. So piece by piece, I brought in all the plants and eventually figured out a setup that I kind of liked. After, of course, cleaning up all the old ones and getting them all planted into the new habitat. I even took this plant, which was pretty gross, from a pot at the house and planted that too for a little bit of flair. So, and here we are. Now, a beautiful jungle oasis turned into this from a disgusting, old, dirty terrarium. I threw some lights in, here we are. Beautiful, luscious jungle oasis. Taking a look at this, I was pretty happy with how the setup looked right now, but I wasn't the real judge. This wasn't going to be my home. This is hers. She could even see her mansion over there. So here we go. Now she's home. Finally. I'm assuming she liked this much better than the previous old setup. And after a couple days, she really felt at home here and is really excited moving around. And of course, I made sure to give her some cricket visitors for the time being. Yeah, they haven't lasted very long. Just look at that face. It's the face of a killer. Absolute stone cold killer. It's hard to imagine anything in this tank is going to live outside of her.